Have you ever boarded a plane? And in the most peaceful moment, you were looked down upon just because of your appearance. Imagine this: you are sitting in the first class, calm. No one knows you are the owner of the entire plane, but a flight attendant points at you, tells you to go to the back, and slaps you as if you don't deserve to be there. If it were you, would you stand up and fight back? Or would you choose to stay silent and swallow all the humiliation? In the moment, Naomi Carter, a brave black female CEO, was deeply offended. She had to make a choice that anyone who has ever suffered injustice would deeply understand. Stay calm to protect your dignity, or let anger guide you, and a secret she didn't intend to reveal changed everything. Have you ever experienced the feeling of being looked down upon because people thought you didn't belong there? If so, this story is for you. Before we embark on this breathtaking and healing journey, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any heart-touching stories. The sound came before the pain. A sharp, startling crack that cut through the quiet cabin like a lightning snap on a dry summer night. For a moment, everything inside the luxury jet went still. The engines hummed steadily under the floor. A soft overhead light glowed warm and golden above the cream-colored seats. But the silence felt heavy, almost unnatural. Dr. Naomi Carter didn't move right away. The back of Tessa Monroe's hand still hovered in the air, as if even the woman who threw the slap hadn't expected it to land so loudly. Naomi blinked once, steady and slow, grounding herself the way she'd learned to do as a child when things weren't safe, when people weren't kind. She lifted her hand, touched her cheek gently. The sting was hot. The shape of fingers pulsed against her skin. Behind Tessa, a man's voice, smooth, wealthy, dripping with a hint of amusement, broke the moment like a pebble tossed into still water. "Well," Henry Coleman murmured, leaning back in his wide leather seat. "Someone finally put her where she belongs?" Naomi didn't answer him. She didn't look at him. She didn't even look at Tessa. Her eyes lowered to the floor. Not in shame, never that, but to steady her breath. 3 seconds in. Hold. 2 seconds out. She had learned long ago that when the world tried to provoke you, the worst thing you could do was let them see you shaken. But she could feel something colder building in her chest. Not fear. Not embarrassment. Something older. Something she had carried since she was a skinny 11-year-old girl, standing outside her middle school while a police officer questioned her for waiting near the wrong car. That familiar ache rose again. A warning, a reminder. People think they know who you are before you speak a single word. Naomi finally looked up. The first thing she saw wasn't Tessa's anger. It was the fear behind it, the kind of fear that grows in people who believe the world owes them control. A fear that lashes out whenever it feels threatened. Tessa's chest rose and fell too fast. Her eyes were wide, her lips tight, her posture rigid like a deer cornered by headlights. But the words that came out of her mouth didn't tremble. "I said get out of first class," she snapped. "This section is not for you. Your seat is in the back." She pointed down the aisle as if dismissing a child who wandered too close to the grown-up's table. Naomi absorbed the moment. Let the silence stretch. Let the air grow thick. Across the cabin, a glass of champagne trembled lightly in its holder, as if the jet itself understood something irreversible had just taken place. Naomi shifted her weight. Her gray travel pants rustled softly. Her sweater simple, soft, charcoal-colored, hung loosely on her frame. She had dressed for comfort this morning, not for judgment, not for war. She hadn't expected either. Her voice, when it came, was calm, balanced, measured. "Tessa," she said quietly, "why did you hit me?" Tessa scoffed, the sound sharp and too loud for the intimate cabin. "Don't play innocent. You tried to push past me. You were told where to sit." Naomi held her gaze. "I showed you my boarding pass. I don't care what paper you printed at home. You're not supposed to be here." Henry Coleman let out a short laugh behind them, deep and satisfied, like he was folding his arms to enjoy a show. Naomi heard him whisper, These people always try to sneak into places they don't belong. Those words, those words dug deeper than the slap. Not because she hadn't heard them before, but because she'd heard them too many times, in too many forms, from too many mouths. A teacher who once told her college wasn't for everyone. A recruiter who assumed she was applying for an assistant job rather than an executive one. A board member who asked if she was the diversity hire when she walked into the room as the keynote speaker. You don't belong. The chorus she had grown up with. The soundtrack of 1,000 moments. Her fingers curled slightly at her side. Not in anger, but in resolve. Tessa, she said again, softer this time. Look at me. The attendant hesitated before meeting her eyes. Naomi held her attention with a calmness that felt heavy, grounded, impossible to ignore. You crossed a line. And you crossed mine? Tessa shot back. You think wearing those clothes makes you fit in here? You think first class is for whoever just walks in? Her voice sharpened, brittle with cheap confidence. Sit in the back, or I'll have security meet you once we land. Naomi's jaw tightened just barely. Enough for her to feel it, not enough for anyone else to see. Her thoughts spiraled briefly inward. How many times will this happen? How many times must I choose between my pride and my peace? Between teaching someone a lesson and protecting the image I've worked my whole life to build? She remembered her mother's hands warm, steady cupping her face after a day of being bullied in school. Baby, the world won't always know your worth, but you do. Don't let them take that from you. Naomi blinked once, and the memory gave her spine iron. She straightened slowly, not aggressively, not challengingly. Just enough so her presence finally filled the space the way it was meant to. Tessa, she said calmly. I am going to sit in my seat. You're not, Tessa snapped, stepping forward as if ready to block her again. I said, Naomi interrupted gently. You just assaulted the owner of this aircraft. The words floated into the cabin like a quiet thunder. Soft, even, but carrying the weight of truth that changes the air around it. Henry Coleman's smirk vanished. Tessa's face drained of color so fast it looked almost unreal. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't puff her chest or glare or claim dominance. She just stood there steady, dignified, unshaken like a woman who had spent her whole life learning how to rise in rooms designed to push her down. And for the first time since the slap, the jet felt truly silent. Not stunned, not confused, respectful, or perhaps afraid. The cabin still felt frozen after Naomi spoke. No one breathed too loudly. No one shifted in their seat. Even the steady vibration under the floor seemed softer, as if the aircraft itself was waiting to understand what had just happened. Tessa Monroe stepped back half an inch. Her fingers twitched near the hem of her uniform. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, yet no sound escaped. For the first time since Naomi boarded the jet, the young attendant seemed unsure of her place in the room she thought she controlled. Naomi stood there quietly. She did not gloat. She did not scold. She simply let the truth settle in the space they all shared. Inside her chest, however, something trembled. Not fear, something older and familiar. Something that did not appear on her face. Her pulse reminded her of a different time, a different life. Her mind drifted for a moment, uninvited, toward the years when people looked at her the same way Tessa and Henry Coleman looked at her now. Suspicious, dismissive, as if her existence required their permission. A memory rose with startling clarity. She was 16, sitting in a worn office at Midtown High. A guidance counselor sat across from her, hands folded neatly on the desk. He had smiled at her with a softness that did not hide condescension. College is competitive. Naomi, students like you should think practically. Perhaps consider a community program. Something stable, something safe. Students like you. The phrase had stayed with her long after she walked out of that room. She remembered standing outside the school building, watching the traffic roll past, wondering why some people believed they had the right to draw borders around someone else's potential. Her father had found her sitting on the curb that day. He did not say much. He had never been a man of many words, but he placed his calloused hand on her shoulder and said in his deep, steady voice, "You know who you are. They don't build your life anyway." That simple truth carried her across years of schooling, scholarship interviews, sleepless nights, and corporate rooms where she was the only black woman at the table. It carried her through the years of founding Carter Aerospace Mobility, creating technology that people doubted she could build. It carried her onto this jet today, disguised in soft clothes, testing the service on the aircraft she had recently acquired. It carried her now, as she looked at the woman who had struck her in a burst of entitlement. Naomi inhaled through her nose, let the breath loosen her shoulders, and turned slightly toward the nearest window. Clouds drifted beneath them in thick cotton layers. The horizon cut the sky in a soft silver line. From this height, the world felt still, almost forgiving. Yet down below, she knew. People like Tessa thrived in small pockets, where prejudice hid comfortably in polite words. Naomi returned her attention to the cabin. Henry Coleman still stared at her, but the smug tilt on his face had begun to falter. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and looked away briefly as if convincing himself he had not miscalculated as badly as he had. When Naomi finally spoke again, her voice held the same softness as before. A softness sharpened by truth. "You struck me because you assumed I did not belong here." Tessa swallowed. Her eyes flicked toward Coleman, searching for support, but he offered none. Her voice cracked when she managed to respond. "I thought you were ignoring instructions, like the manifest? I did not see your name." Naomi nodded slightly. She had heard that explanation before. She had lived that explanation her entire life. Mistaken identity, misunderstanding, an oversight, each one a different name for the same thing. She felt anger trying to push through her calm, but she kept her tone steady. "You did see my name. You read it in the lounge. You chose not to believe it." Tessa flinched at the accuracy of the words. Her cheeks reddened. Her fingers knotted together in front of her waist as if they had nowhere else to go. Naomi could have stopped there. She could have let the shame do the work. But she believed in truth more than she believed in victory. Truth taught lessons. Victory only ended one moment. She let a pause settle. Not long. Just enough for her own heartbeat to slow. "Tessa," she said gently, "what did you see when you looked at me? What made you so certain I could not be where I am?" The question was simple. It was also devastating. Tessa opened her mouth, closed it, looked down as if her shoes might offer answers her conscience could not. After a long moment, she whispered something too low to hear. Naomi waited. Tessa finally raised her eyes and forced the words out. "You did not look like someone who flies first class." Naomi let the confession drift through her. It hurt, but it did not surprise her. "Thank you for telling the truth," she said softly. Henry Coleman scoffed from his seat but did not speak. Something in his eyes suggested he sensed a shift in power, but could not identify where it was coming from. Naomi straightened her posture. The sting on her cheek pulsed again, but she no longer felt wounded. Only clear. "I do not dress to prove my worth," she said quietly. "My seat is not defined by your expectations." Her voice did not shake. Her presence filled the room with a calm gravity that Tessa could not seem to look away from. "I'm going to sit in the place I paid for." Naomi continued. "We can address everything else once we land." She stepped forward. Tessa did not block her this time. Not a single muscle in the attendant's body moved. Naomi walked past her with quiet confidence and settled into the first-class seat she had chosen that morning. She fastened her belt slowly, focusing on the sound of the buckle clicking into place. The simple metallic note soothed her. It reminded her of her father working in the garage, tools clicking against the frame of an unfinished engine. She closed her eyes a moment and breathed. Outside, the clouds drifted. Inside, tension hung in the cabin like a taut string. Naomi opened her eyes again and looked ahead. This was no longer just about a slap line, it was about something far older, it's far wider, a shadow that followed her through life. But something inside her knew this moment would not end in silence. On the other side of the cabin, Henry Coleman shifted again. He watched Naomi with a new expression. Not amusement, not anger, something closer to calculation. Naomi noticed. She did not react. She simply sat, calm, grounded, unapologetically present. She did not know yet how deep this conflict would go, or how many lies sat beneath the slap she had just endured. But she sensed the truth was waiting for her on the ground. This flight was only the beginning. The jet glided through the high sky, leaving a faint tremor beneath the seats. Naomi sat still in the wide leather chair, her palms resting gently on her lap. The sting on her cheek had softened, but the memory of the slap still settled in her body like a bruise forming beneath the ribcage. Across from her, Henry Coleman watched with a stiff jaw, as if trying to fit her back into the small box he carved for her earlier. Tessa stood near the galley, breathing unevenly, her hands fidgeting at her sides. The cabin had not recovered from the truth she had just heard. But part 3 of Naomi's journey had begun much earlier, before the slap, before the flight, before the shock that rippled through the jet. It began back in the lounge. Those small moments had carried weight. They had shaped the tension now hanging in the air. Naomi let her gaze fall to the oval window again, but her mind drifted back to where the unraveling had truly started. The McAllister private terminal in Boston carried a certain hush that expensive places often pretend is elegance. Thick carpets muted footsteps. Dim gold lights gave everything a warm glow. Framed photographs of famous travelers lined the walls. The kind of airport lounge where wealth spoke before anyone opened their mouth. Naomi walked in wearing her soft sweater and charcoal pants. A simple canvas bag rested on her shoulder, the kind she had used for years. Comfort mattered more to her than signals. The receptionist at the desk had looked up with a polite smile. A polite smile that shifted the moment her eyes traced Naomi's clothes. Her skin, her natural curls pulled into a low bun. "Hello, ma'am. This lounge is for private flight passengers only." Her tone was courteous, but carried a layer that Naomi recognized instantly. A line drawn without being drawn. Naomi offered her boarding pass with the same ease she used in conference rooms where billionaires tried to intimidate her. The receptionist hesitated for barely a second, just long enough for Naomi to catch, "Oh, of course, you may go in." Those 2 words, "of course." They lingered in Naomi's chest. They were always the sign someone's assumptions had met a collision with reality. Inside the lounge, she found a seat near the wall. She set her bag down gently. A television in the corner played muted stock reports. The quiet comfort of the room should have been relaxing. Yet a familiar prickle sat behind her ribs. She noticed the glances almost immediately. A couple in tailored clothes glanced her way, held whispers behind raised cups. A middle-aged man with slicked hair paused while passing, eyes narrowing just a little too long. Naomi leaned back, opened her tablet, and tried to ignore the small weather shifts in the room. She had lived them all her life, her mother used to say. Some storms are so quiet. Only your skin can hear them. Naomi had never forgotten that. She was reviewing an engineering report when a voice rose from the lounge bar. Sharp and irritated. Henry Coleman. She recognized him from the aviation news cycles. He was wealthy, loud, and known for investing heavily in smaller competitor companies. He sat in a wide chair near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, even though the day was still stretching itself awake. A woman in a crisp navy uniform stood next to him, nodding with forced politeness. "I told them I want the cabin temperature set exactly to 72. Coleman complained, as if repeating himself were an assault on his dignity. "Anything above that, and I cannot breathe." The lounge staff member apologized softly, rushing back toward the desk. Coleman muttered something under his breath, his gaze drifting until it landed on Naomi. He watched her for a few seconds. Too long, as if trying to place her, as if searching for a label that made sense to him. Her tablet dimmed slightly and she touched the screen to wake it. Coleman's eyebrows lifted, amused. Not many in this lounge look like you, he said loudly enough for her to hear. Are you with one of the crews? Naomi didn't react immediately. Her first instinct was to let his words fall away like dust, but a gentler voice inside her reminded her that silence was a door they kept walking through. No, she answered without lifting her eyes. I'm a passenger. Coleman chuckled, an easy, dismissive sound. Uh, well then. Well then carried centuries of judgment in two little syllables. A few minutes later, another figure entered the lounge. A flight attendant. Young, confident, her blonde hair perfectly sculpted. Her uniform fit sharply, and she carried the polished posture of someone who wanted authority, even where she hadn't earned it. Tessa Monroe. She walked straight to Coleman's seat with a warm smile, ignoring Naomi entirely. Mr. Coleman, she greeted, her voice bright. I'll be serving you on the flight today. May I get you something? Coleman grinned, instantly charmed. Something strong. I have a long trip ahead. Tessa nodded quickly and hurried toward the bar. It was when she returned with his drink that she finally looked in Naomi's direction. Her brows pinched subtly. Her lips pursed. Can I help you with something? She asked. Not in a service tone, but a startled one. Her eyes flicked toward Naomi's sweater, her bag, her shoes. No, thank you, Naomi replied gently. Tessa didn't leave. She looked at the receptionist, then at Coleman, then back at Naomi. Her discomfort sharpened into something else. Ma'am, she said, you're aware this lounge is for passengers of the private flight? Correct. Naomi met her eyes calmly. Yes, I'm aware. Tessa nodded stiffly. I see, but it was clear she didn't. Naomi had learned long ago how to read the small fractures in people's responses. There was no open hostility in Tessa's tone, but there was a tightness that suggested she had drawn a conclusion about Naomi the second she saw her. Naomi tried to return to her tablet, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something in Tessa's posture told her that their next interaction wouldn't be simple. She was right. When boarding was announced, things escalated quickly. Coleman rose with the confidence of someone accustomed to being first in every line. Tessa followed closely, assisting him with exaggerated enthusiasm. Naomi waited a moment, giving space, always preferring calm over conflict. She approached the boarding door with her tablet in hand, ready to present her pass if needed, but Tessa stepped in front of her again. I'll help Mr. Coleman first, she said. You can wait at the back? Her voice was cool. Her eyes had already dismissed Naomi. In that instant, Naomi felt the old ache again. That ache of realizing a stranger had decided who she was without knowing a single part of her story. She almost told Tessa her name, almost told her the truth right there. But she didn't. She wanted to see. She wanted to understand. So she waited. Not because she accepted disrespect, but because she needed to see how far the assumptions would go. And they had gone further than even she expected. They had led to a slap at 41,000 feet. The cabin air seemed to pulse with memory as Naomi sat in first class now, letting the truth settle. The story had started long before the slap, and the meaning of it reached further than the confines of the jet. It had begun in a lounge, with a look, with a doubt, with a question laced in assumption, and it would not end until the truth was seen. The memory of the lounge felt distant now, softened by the hum of the engines. Yet Naomi could still sense how the small disrespect she faced there had gathered weight, grain by grain, until it finally broke open on this jet. Her cheek no longer burned, but the echo of that moment lingered in the quiet between breaths. She exhaled slowly, resting her palms on the armrests. Her mind drifted back again, through the corridor that connected the lounge to the private boarding gate. When the announcement came through the speakers that Flight C-7A was ready, a handful of passengers rose. Henry Coleman stood first, adjusting his suit jacket with a smooth tug that suggested he believed the world moved when he moved. He glanced at Naomi once, almost surprised she remained seated. then turned away with a light huff. Naomi lifted her bag, slinging it gently across her shoulder. She always moved with an ease that came from years of needing to stay composed in unfriendly spaces. The lounge doors parted, revealing the quiet hallway that led directly to the aircraft. Coleman walked several steps ahead. Tessa Monroe walked beside him, asking if he preferred the lighting in the cabin dimmed or brightened before takeoff. Her posture reflected a kind of polished confidence she clearly enjoyed wearing. Naomi followed at a respectful distance. She preferred not to hover near people who had already judged her, but she also refused to hang so far back that she seemed intimidated. Each step brought her closer to the aircraft she had purchased only weeks before. She had chosen it for its engineering precision, its safety record, and the possibilities it offered for private humanitarian missions her company often supported. There was pride in her stride, even if she kept it soft beneath the surface. When she reached the base of the jet staircase, a ramp agent nodded politely and stepped aside. Naomi thanked him with a warm smile. Inside the cabin entrance, the soft scent of clean leather and cedar greeted her. The temperature was balanced perfectly, and the subtle glow of reading lights made the space feel welcoming. It was a jet meant for rest, negotiation, and long hours of thought. A jet she had hoped would become a part of the next chapter of her company's work, before she could take a step toward her seat. Tessa shifted abruptly into her path. Her voice held none of the polished hospitality she had given Coleman. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there." Naomi paused, adjusting her grip on the strap of her bag. "Is something wrong?" she asked calmly. Tessa lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, Mr. Coleman is getting settled in his section. You'll need to wait. Passengers seated farther back should not be boarding before him." Naomi blinked once, letting the words settle. Her tone remained soft. "My boarding pass lists me in the forward cabin." Tessa didn't look at the pass. She kept her eyes locked on Naomi's face. "That must be a mistake," she said lightly. Her lips curved in a dismissive smile. "The forward cabin is reserved for elite frequent flyers and private owners, people who actually belong up here." Naomi didn't react immediately. She felt the familiar tightening of her ribs, that quiet ache that had followed her through airports, restaurants, and corporate lobbies for years. She didn't let that ache speak for her. "I'm sitting in first class today," she said. Tessa folded her arms. "You can't just walk into that cabin because you feel like you deserve it. Your seat is in the back. I checked the manifest myself." Naomi considered the words carefully. She could sense the hostility rising, not from a single moment, but from a chain of assumptions that had begun forming in the lounge. "May I see the manifest?" she asked. Tessa stiffened. "There's no need for that." Her tone sharpened. "Stop holding up boarding. Go to your assigned area, please." The please sounded more like a warning than a courtesy. Coleman looked back from his seat, watching with interest. That same small smile curved at the edge of his mouth, as if seeing a predictable story unfold. Naomi breathed in slowly. She could feel the air thinning around them, not from altitude but from tension. She placed her bag down at her feet and tried one last time to resolve things peacefully. "Tessa, I believe my name is listed correctly. Would you look again?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "No, I will not. Because I know what I saw, and I know where you belong on this aircraft." Her voice carried the finality of someone who thought her judgment was truth. The ache inside Naomi twisted gently. Her mother's voice surfaced in her memory. "When people decide who they think you are, you cannot convince them with logic, only with truth that stands taller than their assumptions." Naomi steadied herself. "I am going to take my seat now," she said quietly. She tried to step forward. Tessa moved sharply into her path, her shoulder brushing Naomi's arm. The sudden jolt surprised Naomi more than the contact itself. "I said no," Tessa snapped. Her chest rose in quick, angry breaths. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Naomi's fingers curled at her side for a moment, a reflex she quickly softened. She refused to let anger speak for her. Anger had never carried her through doors. Calm had. Grace had. Principle had. Her voice remained even. Tessa, I need you to step aside. I won't. Tessa's voice trembled. It was the kind of tremble that came not from fear but from indignation. In that instant, Naomi understood exactly where this moment was heading. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't even poor training. It was a line drawn by someone who thought her presence threatened the order of the world she believed she belonged to. A world Naomi had worked tirelessly to navigate with integrity and intellect. Naomi tried to move again. Tessa shoved her this time. The push wasn't violent, but it was intentional, claiming ownership of the aisle. Naomi caught herself, planting her feet firmly. She stared at Tessa, eyes steady, breath anchored. Do not put your hands on me again. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of lived experience, of every boundary crossed by people who never feared consequences. Tessa's eyes flashed. Or what? She spat. You'll report me. You think they'll listen to you? Before Naomi could respond, Coleman laughed from his seat. Goodness, let her do her job. He said, some passengers forget their place. His words were gasoline poured on open flame. Tessa tightened her jaw so hard her teeth clicked. She stepped forward, raising her hand. At that moment, Naomi felt a familiar coldness settle behind her ribs. A coldness she had learned to live with. A coldness that reminded her she had climbed too far, worked too hard, pushed through too many locked doors to ever bow to cruelty. She opened her mouth to speak, but she never got the chance. Tessa's hand sliced through the air and it struck Naomi's cheek with a loud crack. The memory of that moment, the heat of that slap, the shock that filled the cabin would follow them all the way into the sky. The moment stretched in two directions at once. Forward, into the shock that filled the cabin. Backward, into every unspoken slight Naomi had endured across a lifetime. The slap landed with a full, ringing violence that didn't match the size of Tessa Monroe's hand. It came from deeper than her palm. It came from entitlement, anger, fear of losing control. It came from a place Naomi had known too well. For a second, Naomi did not move. Her head turned just enough for her cheek to throb beneath her fingertips. The warmth spread slowly across her skin, blooming into a sting. She heard the air around her shift, the sound of someone inhaling too sharply, the rustle of fabric as a passenger stiffened, the faint click of a glass tipping in its holder beside Henry Coleman. Tessa stood frozen, her chest rising in quick breaths. Her eyes were wide, but there was triumph hiding beneath the fear. She had expected Naomi to crumble, or to shout, or to prove her stereotype right. Instead, Naomi's stillness unnerved her. The aircraft vibrated beneath their feet, engine steady, as if the sky itself waited for Naomi's next breath. Naomi lowered her hand from her cheek. The pain was sharp, but not unfamiliar. Pain she had practiced surviving since she was too small to reach a kitchen counter. Pain that came from being underestimated, dismissed, pushed aside. She turned slowly and faced Tessa fully. Her eyes were calm, not cold, not vacant. Calm in the way oceans look moments before a storm breaks open. Tessa took a small step back. A flicker of doubt filled her expression. Naomi let her voice rise gently above the hum of the cabin. You just struck the owner of this aircraft. The words left her lips without force. Without anger, they didn't need either. Truth didn't need volume, it needed space. And the cabin gave her all of it. Henry Coleman's smirk dissolved instantly. His mouth parted in disbelief, his glass trembling slightly in his hand. A line formed between his brows as if he were trying to make sense of what he heard. Tessa blinked. Once, twice. Her breath caught. She shook her head in a tiny, frantic gesture, not out of denial but out of terror. No, her voice cracked. No, that is not possible. You are not. She stumbled over her words. You are not the owner. Naomi did not look away. This was not the moment to shrink. Her whole life had prepared her for moments like this. I am Dr. Naomi Carter, she said with quiet clarity. I purchased this jet 3 weeks ago during the fleet consolidation. My name is on the registration. My company maintains the cabin systems, and you, Tessa Monroe, just committed assault at 41,000 feet. The silence deepened. It shifted from shock to recognition, and the recognition settled like a weight on Tessa's shoulders. She shook her head again, but her voice faltered. Her confidence slipped from her like water draining through cupped hands. No, I thought. Exactly, Naomi replied softly. You thought. Those two words hit harder than the slap had. Tessa's lips trembled. A faint quiver started beneath her eye. Henry Coleman finally found his voice. This is absurd, he barked, though the tremor in his tone betrayed him. If she owned this aircraft, the manifest would show it. Naomi met his gaze. It does. She reached into her bag and pulled out her digital ID, tapping the corner of the seat screen. The system lit up. Her full name appeared across the cabin terminal. Owner, Carter Aerospace Mobility. Clearance level red. Coleman's face drained its color. Tessa stared at the glowing screen as if it were a verdict being read aloud in a courtroom. Naomi felt her heartbeat settle, grounding her again, but there was no satisfaction in watching their faces change. No victory in this revelation, only a deep tiredness in her bones. She wasn't angry that they didn't know who she was. She was tired that they assumed so much based on what she looked like. Tessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The cabin lights reflected in her eyes, amplifying the fear she could no longer hide. Naomi inhaled slowly. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Stand tall. Baby girl. When they try to shrink you, rise without trembling. She rose now. I gave you several chances to correct your behavior, she said quietly. Instead, you escalated your assumptions into violence. We will address this once we land. The word we surrounded Tessa like a cold wind. A noise from the cockpit startled them all. The door opened slightly, and the first officer leaned into the aisle. Everything all right back here? He asked. Scanning the tense faces, Naomi nodded once. Yes, please return to your duties. We will need cockpit contact upon landing. The first officer froze. Recognition settled over him like a shadow lifting. Dr. Carter, he stammered. I did not realize you were on board today. His voice held respect, and fear of what this situation now meant for the crew. Carry on, she replied gently. He closed the cockpit door with a soft click. Tessa's hands shook. Coleman leaned forward, gripping his armrest as if the world had flipped beneath him. Naomi returned to her seat, her movements slow and deliberate. She brushed her sweater gently, smoothed it as if brushing away the last traces of what had just happened. Inside, however, her thoughts churned. Why did this still happen? Why was dignity something she had to defend again and again? Why did the world insist on challenging her worth every time she chose softness over armor? Her breath steadied as she looked out the window. Clouds rolled below in thick white layers. Somewhere beneath them were highways, neighborhoods, schools, communities full of people who would understand exactly how this moment felt. She wasn't alone, even here. She placed her palm flat against her knee. This was not the end of the story. The truth was only beginning to unfold. The cabin door remained closed, but the faint tremble in the air told Naomi the cockpit crew was alert. Word traveled quickly inside a jet. Silence had its own pulse. The aircraft hummed softly, a steady vibration that filled the space between breaths. Naomi rested her palms on her armrests once more. Her cheek still carried a dull warmth, but the emotional sting faded into something steadier. Composure. Resolve. A quiet strength she had learned to claim long before this flight, across from her. Tessa Monroe stood stiffly, her shoulders rising with each breath. The confidence she had displayed earlier had fallen away, leaving only panic covered with a thin coat of denial. She whispered something to herself, as if rehearsing the story she hoped would save her. Henry Coleman watched everything with a strange mixture of disbelief and stubborn pride. There was tension around his mouth, a hint of resistance. Perhaps he was searching for any angle that kept him from being on the wrong side of the moment. A soft click interrupted the stillness. The cockpit door opened again, this time wider. Captain Lane Harlow stepped out. His posture was controlled, not hurried, not alarmed. Calm in a way only people who had spent decades handling airborne emergencies could manage. His hair was mostly silver, his pilot uniform immaculate, boots polished even after countless flights. His eyes scanned the cabin, taking in Naomi's steady presence, Tessa's trembling stance, and Coleman's stiff expression. It took only seconds for him to understand the weight of what had happened. "Dr. Carter," he said respectfully, "are you hurt?" The question carried concern, not performance. He wasn't asking to protect himself. He was asking because he knew who she was, knew what she represented, and understood the gravity of the situation. Naomi nodded slightly. "I'm all right." Tessa flinched at the acknowledgement. Her voice came out in a rushed whisper. "Captain, it wasn't what you think. She pushed me first. I had to defend myself. She wasn't following protocol." And Captain Harlow raised one hand gently, not to silence her, but to steady the air around them. "Ms. Monroe, before you speak further, I need you to be very certain you understand the consequences of your words." His tone was calm, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. Tessa's throat tightened. The denial she clung to wavered. Henry Coleman leaned forward, seizing the pause. "Captain," he began, "this whole thing is an overreaction." The woman refused to go to her seat. "This is being blown out." Captain Harlow turned to him, and for the first time, there was displeasure on his face. "Mr. Coleman, please refrain from escalating the situation. What happens now will be handled with accuracy, not assumptions." The word assumptions hung in the air like a mirror no one wanted to face. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. She had not intended for the pilot to be pulled into this so early. She preferred conflict to be settled quietly. But faint humiliation still clung to her ribs like smoke after a fire. Some moments simply demanded witness. Captain Harlow turned back to her. "Dr. Carter, would you like to file an incident report in flight? I will document everything for the authorities when we land." Tessa's gasp broke the room's stillness. "Authorities?" The word struck her like a physical blow. She stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Captain, please, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know who she was. No one told me the owner would be disguised as a regular traveler." I thought Captain Harlow's expression sharpened. His voice remained low. "Ms. Monroe, we do not treat passengers with respect based on who they are. We do it because it is our job, and because it is the standard Dr. Carter herself requires of us." Tessa's lips trembled. Her gaze darted toward Naomi with desperation. "I wasn't trying to hurt her. I swear. She looked like she was somewhere she shouldn't be. I was trying to keep order." Naomi opened her eyes slowly. "Trying to keep order," she repeated, her voice soft but steady. "Even after I showed you my boarding pass?" Tessa swallowed hard. Her denial collapsed into scattered pieces on the floor between them. I made a mistake," she whispered. Captain Harlow let silence follow her words, letting the weight of them settle. Finally, he looked to Naomi again. "What would you like us to do, Dr. Carter?" Naomi inhaled slowly, her chest rising with the weight of 1,000 similar moments she had walked quietly past. Her voice came out with calm clarity. "Right now, Captain, I want to reach our destination safely." She shifted her gaze to Tessa, holding it without cruelty. "After we land, we will handle the rest." Captain Harlow nodded. "Understood." He turned toward the cockpit but paused at the threshold. He looked back at Tessa. "Ms. Monroe, until we land, You are to remain in the forward galley. Another attendant will manage the cabin. You will not interact with Dr. Carter under any circumstance. Tessa's posture sagged. Her hands opened and closed weakly at her sides. Captain, please, I... His voice remained firm. This is not a negotiation. Her eyes filled with moisture but did not spill over. She took a shaky step back toward the galley, brushing past the curtain without another word. Coleman scoffed again quietly. Ridiculous, he muttered. People make mistakes. Doesn't mean they should lose everything? Naomi heard him but did not respond. She had learned long ago that some people clung to ignorance because it cushioned them from confronting themselves. Captain Harlow returned to the cockpit. The click of the closing door echoed through the cabin. For a long moment, Naomi sat quietly, her gaze drifting to the window. The horizon stretched in a soft line. Clouds drifted beneath them, an endless landscape of white and gray. Inside her, the ache settled again. Not sharp, just deep. People always say progress has been made, she thought. Yet here I am, owning the aircraft, and still being treated like I don't belong in the seat I paid for. She rested her palm gently on her cheek, feeling the fading heat. Her father's voice rose again in memory. You don't fight every battle, baby. But the ones that find you, you face with your spine straight. She whispered to herself. Spine straight? Always. The engines hummed on, somewhere behind the galley curtain. Tessa Monroe stood alone, trembling in a silence of her own making. Somewhere in the main cabin, Henry Coleman sat rigid, trying desperately to scale the walls of a truth he was unwilling to accept. Somewhere in the cockpit, Captain Harlow prepared for a descent none of them yet understood would be far more dramatic than anticipated. And Naomi. Naomi breathed, strong, calm, ready. This confrontation was only the beginning. The cabin settled into a strained quiet that seemed to stretch across the entire aircraft. Naomi sat with her hands resting gently on her knees, the steady hum beneath her grounding her more than the seatbelt ever could. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't angry. She was simply present, letting her breath fall into a slow rhythm. The curtain separating the galley from the cabin fluttered once, as if stirred by someone shifting behind it. Naomi didn't look over. She knew Tessa Monroe was trying to compose herself, possibly whispering frantic apologies to no one, possibly rehearsing her version of the story again. Denial often lived loudest in solitude. Henry Coleman shifted in his seat, unable to settle. The usual confidence he carried had fractured into discomfort. He searched for something firm to lean on inside a moment that refused to give him footing. Naomi looked forward, her posture steady. She suspected the worst part of the ordeal was behind her. She was wrong. A faint metallic clink came from the floor, a sound so soft it didn't belong in a cabin meant for serenity. Naomi leaned forward slightly. Something had rolled beneath the first row of seats, small, round, gleaming faintly near the aisle. She reached down and picked it up gently. It was a marble-sized device, smooth black exterior, a tiny red dot on the side. A camera? A tiny hidden camera. Naomi held it in her palm for a long moment, letting its weight reveal far more than its size. Her pulse deepened. This was no passenger's toy. These nanorecorders weren't sold casually. They were used for targeted recording, corporate espionage, data capture. Her breath softened, barely audible. So that's what this is. She turned the device over slowly and pressed the small indentation along the edge. The red dot blinked twice before a miniature green light appeared. Active recording. It had captured everything. The slap, the accusations, the humiliation, the truth. She felt a cold pressure form behind her ribs. Not fear, not dread. A deeper recognition. Something inside her whispered that none of this was random. Naomi set the device gently on the armrest. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a firmness that settled into every corner of the cabin. Captain Harlow. The cockpit door opened almost instantly. Captain Lane Harlow stepped out again. recognizing the shift in Naomi's tone. He approached her with attentive caution. Yes, Dr. Carter. She lifted the device in her palm. Is this standard equipment in the cabin? Harlow's expression changed at once. His eyes sharpened with concern. No, absolutely not. Coleman straightened, sensing danger swirling closer. Naomi turned the device in her fingers, letting it catch the cabin light. I found it near Mr. Coleman's row. Coleman flinched, startled. Now wait just a second. He protested. I didn't put any device anywhere. I don't carry that kind of thing. His tone rose too quickly, as if guilt or fear pushed from beneath the surface. Captain Harlow examined the device with a trained eye. His jaw tightened. This is a covert recorder. Tessa, hearing his voice, peeked through the curtain. Her eyes widened as soon as she saw the object. Oh no, she whispered, voice cracking. Naomi shifted her gaze toward her. You recognize this? Tessa stepped out fully despite her orders, her breath shaking. I didn't put it there, I swear. Her voice softened into a tremor. But I've seen one like it. Naomi held her eyes. Where? Tessa swallowed hard. Her fingers shook. One of the mechanics at the hangar. He had something like that. He said he was documenting maintenance. She hesitated. His name was Jason Harlow. He said he worked under the new contracts after the fleet acquisitions. Captain Harlow's expression changed immediately: shock, then anger, then something much heavier. Jason is my nephew. The air thinned. Tessa's voice faltered. He said someone was paying him for extra footage. Something about proving the company had safety issues. I didn't know. Captain Harlow's eyes lowered as if processing a betrayal deeper than anything the cabin had seen. Naomi's chest tightened. Pieces clicked into place. Footage. Proof of mismanagement. Records of conflict. A narrative shaping itself even before the flight took off. Naomi stood slowly, her presence commanding without force. Captain, she said softly, may I see the full log? Harlow activated the playback. Frozen images flickered onto the tiny display. Tessa blocking her path, the shove, the slap, Coleman's smirk, Naomi's composure, every second captured from a deliberate angle. Naomi's hand steadied on the armrest as she exhaled slowly. Over her shoulder, Coleman muttered curses under his breath. This is an insurance setup, Naomi said quietly. Someone wants to prove I mistreat passengers or staff. Someone wants a narrative of misconduct attached to my name. Captain Harlow nodded slowly, jaw locked tight. Coleman leaned back, realizing his earlier comments were now part of evidence. He wiped his palms on his pants. Tessa collapsed into the nearest jump seat, burying her face in her hands. I didn't know, she whispered through trembling fingers. He said I just had to follow protocol. Make sure certain footage looked stressful. That tension helps the claim. Her voice broke. He didn't tell me it would go this far. Tension. Claims. Footage. Naomi's heart folded inward. Quietly. So many people were comfortable using her image as collateral. Captain Harlow clenched the tiny device. Dr. Carter, he said, his voice thick with apology. We will investigate this fully when we land. My nephew. He shook his head. This goes deeper than a single mistake from the crew. Naomi lowered her gaze. Her voice softened. It always does. She sat back down, placing the device on the armrest between them, like a symbol of everything she had already survived. The cabin remained still. Outside the window, the sky expanded endlessly, unaware of the betrayals unfolding inside the aircraft it carried. In that moment, Naomi didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. Someone wanted her reputation undermined. Someone wanted a scandal strong enough to dent her name in the industry. Someone knew exactly which prejudices people would believe first. She breathed deeply. Let them try. She had faced worse than this. The hum of the engines softened into a steady background note, like a heartbeat beneath the metal skin of the aircraft. Naomi sat with the recorder resting in her palm. Its tiny green light glowed softly, almost innocent in appearance. Yet the truth inside it carried the weight of a deliberate scheme. Captain Harlow stood a few feet away, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed with disbelief. Tessa Monroe lingered near the galley curtain, her fingers twisting together in small, desperate motions. Henry Coleman stared at the floor, jaw tight, a man calculating not morality, but consequences. Naomi let the device roll gently between her fingers. She wasn't rushing to speak. Silence could be sharper than accusation. Silence forced people to listen to themselves. After several breaths, she lifted her eyes. "Captain," she said quietly, "do you have a maintenance roster from yesterday's pre-flight inspection?" Harlow nodded. "Yes, it's logged in the cockpit. I reviewed it myself." Naomi gave him a small gesture to continue. He disappeared through the cockpit door. Only a faint electronic beep signaled that he had accessed the internal logs. Coleman shifted in his seat again. "This is being blown out of proportion," he muttered, though even he no longer sounded convinced. If someone left a device behind, it doesn't mean Naomi raised her eyes toward him, her gaze steady. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "your voice is recorded on this device." He froze. A small tremor flickered across his jaw. She continued with the same gentle firmness. "Every word you said was captured. Not by accident. This wasn't random. Someone knew people like you would react predictably." Coleman bristled, a flush rising in his neck. "People like me?" His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to hide it. Naomi did not blink. "People who assume the worst of me without needing facts? People who feel safer believing a lie because it fits the story they prefer?" For a moment, something ashamed flickered in Coleman's eyes. He did not answer. The cockpit door opened again. Captain Harlow stepped out, his face pale in a way Naomi had never seen on a man so seasoned. "Dr. Carter?" His voice was low. "Jason's name is on the inspection sheet. He cleared this jet alone." Naomi nodded once. "Continue." "He was assigned here through a referral from a subcontractor we absorbed during the fleet expansion." He looked at the recorder again, his breath unsteady. "I never suspected he'd be involved in anything like this." Tessa spoke from the galley, her voice barely a whisper. He told me the company was corrupt, that the new owners cut corners, that he was gathering evidence for safety reforms." Naomi's gaze sharpened. "Reforms," she repeated softly. Tessa's voice cracked. He said people needed to know the truth. He needed footage that showed chaos, mistreatment, tension in the cabin." Her eyes lifted, filled with regret. "He told me to nudge situations. Nothing violent. Just make things look unprofessional." Naomi inhaled deeply. Her shoulders rose slowly, almost imperceptibly. "So he planted the device, and you provided the spectacle." Tessa lowered her head, shaking slightly. "I didn't think it would escalate." "I didn't think that is the problem," Naomi said quietly. "You didn't think. You assumed." Her voice was soft, but the softness carried edges. Captain Harlow stepped closer. "Dr. Carter, I will file a full report the moment we land. This is not something the company will tolerate. Jason will be found, and anyone else involved." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the strength in her expression was undeniable. "Show me everything the recorder captured." The captain tapped the device. The small display lit up, showing a scrolling list of timestamps. Naomi tapped the earliest log. The footage played silently. The camera had been recording since the aircraft was empty, long before boarding. It must have been placed during the inspection. The view showed the aisle from a low angle. Jason Harlow walked through the frame, glancing around before positioning the device. His movements were casual, as if planting hidden cameras were part of routine checks. Naomi felt a cold wave pass through her chest. The betrayal stung even though she had never met the man. She moved to the next clip. Coleman entering the cabin, muttering complaints. Tessa greeting him warmly. Their conversation captured in crisp clarity. Naomi watched herself enter the aircraft next, Tessa stepping abruptly into her path, Coleman watching with thin amusement. The recording displayed every second with unfiltered truth. Then came the moment of escalation. Tessa's shove, Naomi's warning, Coleman's dismissive words, and finally, the slap echoing even in silent playback. Tessa flinched while watching the footage, tears pooling but not falling. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice fragile. "I should have stopped. I should have walked away. I let him convince me you were the threat when it was the other way around." She covered her face with her hands. "I don't know how I let myself become this person." Naomi felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding of a deeper truth. People aren't born cruel. They learn cruelty from fear. Fear taught by those who benefit from it. She closed the playback. "Captain Harlow," she said softly. "Someone planned this to fracture my leadership, to undermine the acquisition, to tear down credibility before my new fleet expansion." Harlow nodded. "This is sabotage. Dr. Carter, and it goes far beyond my nephew's recklessness." Naomi looked out the window. The sky stretched wide, endless, calm. Her voice softened, carrying depth shaped by many battles she had fought quietly. People don't try to destroy what is weak, only what is powerful, only what threatens them. Coleman shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze. Tessa sobbed quietly in the galley. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the trembling sound of a woman realizing she had become complicit in something bigger than prejudice. Naomi took another slow breath. Her calm filled the cabin like a grounding force. "We will handle this when we land," she said. "Not with anger, with truth, with the law, and with clarity." Captain Harlow straightened. "Dr. Carter, you have my word. The moment we touch the ground, protection teams and investigators will be ready." Naomi nodded, touching the recorder lightly. "This device tried to define me." She closed her hand around it. "Now it will define them." Outside, the aircraft pressed forward through layers of soft white cloud. But inside, the truth had finally surfaced. Not even the sky could outrun what was coming. The cabin grew quieter than before. Not the peaceful quiet of a smooth flight, but the heavy quiet that settles when truth pulls the oxygen from a room. Naomi held the recorder in her hand, its tiny green light blinking like an unspoken reminder that nothing about this moment was accidental. She leaned back slowly. The leather seat pressed a soft coolness against her shoulders, grounding her. For a few breaths, the world narrowed to the dim golden lighting, the faded warmth on her cheek, and the low thrum beneath her feet. She could sense the weight of everyone in the cabin. Tessa's trembling presence behind the galley curtain, Coleman's uneasy shifting nearby, Captain Harlow standing like a man whose world had been cracked open by betrayal. Naomi's gaze drifted toward the window. Cloud layers drifted below them in broad strokes. Streaks of white stretched across a pale horizon. Something in that view tugged at a memory she had not visited in a long time. She closed her eyes. A different plane. A different seat. She was 8, legs too short to touch the floor. Her mother held her hand, thumb brushing circles across her knuckles. A flight attendant, thin, polite, composed, had leaned toward them with a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. "Sweetheart," the attendant said, lowering her voice as if hiding kindness behind secrecy. "Your section is in the back. Economy." She gestured with 2 fingers, guiding them away from the empty seats up front. Naomi's mother held her daughter's hand tighter. "Are you asking us to move because of our ticket or because of our skin?" she asked softly. The attendant blinked, stiffened, deflected, then repeated the instruction, firmer this time. Naomi remembered the sound of her mother's inhale, a slow, deep breath that felt like a quiet shield. "We will move," her mother finally said. Then she kneeled beside Naomi's small legs and whispered, "You don't argue with small minds on small days. You save your strength for the rooms that matter." That moment had shaped her. It had taught her patience. It had taught her which battles deserved her voice. But sitting here now, years later, on her own aircraft, watching prejudice unfold in a new disguise, Naomi felt that childhood ache rise again, a hollow tightening of the chest, a reminder of how deeply these moments cut, even when wrapped in experience. Captain Harlow took a step closer, his voice pulling her gently back into the present. "Dr. Carter, are you all right?" Naomi opened her eyes. She let a quiet moment pass before answering. "I'm thinking," she said softly. Harlow waited, sensing she needed space. She turned the recorder over in her palm. Each rotation felt like peeling back a layer of her own, past moments she had buried, moments that now rose with clarity she hadn't expected. "This isn't just sabotage," Naomi said. "There's something familiar about the way this was planned." Coleman lifted his eyes, curiosity breaking through his discomfort. "Familiar how?" Naomi hesitated, then spoke with the openness she had avoided for years. "When I started my first aerospace division, there were people who told investors that my degrees were fabricated, people who questioned whether I was the real architect behind my patents, people who insisted I had to be the face for someone else's work." She paused. The ache in her chest tightened again, but she let the pain breathe rather than suppress it. "They didn't attack my intelligence," she said quietly. "They attacked the assumption that someone like me could build something worth fearing." Coleman shifted uncomfortably. He couldn't meet her eyes, but his silence showed he heard her. Naomi continued, voice steady. "Every milestone I reached, someone tried to bury with a different narrative. When you threaten their hierarchy, they reach for whatever weapons they can find." Captain Harlow lowered his gaze, guilt heavy in his shoulders. "Dr. Carter, if I had known my nephew," Naomi lifted her hand gently. "You didn't know, and you're not responsible for the choices he made." Her compassion startled him. He blinked once, slowly, as if he hadn't expected forgiveness so soon. But Naomi wasn't finished. "This isn't about one mechanic or one flight attendant. What happened here today? It is the kind of attack built on the assumption that the world will believe the worst about me before it believes the truth." Her eyes lowered to the recorder again. "That's why they planted this, not just to create chaos, but to ensure the chaos looked believable." Tessa's voice floated weakly from behind the curtain. "I didn't know they were targeting you. I swear I didn't." Her breath hitched. He made it sound like protecting passengers, like exposing problems. She swallowed. "I didn't think someone would want to hurt you." Naomi's voice softened. "Most people who harm others don't think beyond the moment they act. They don't think about what they're participating in." She exhaled deeply. "They don't think about the people who've survived a lifetime of these moments." Tessa stepped halfway out from behind the curtain, her face pale and streaked with the remnants of tears. She looked younger now, stripped of confidence, her voice barely above a murmur. "Dr. Carter, I should never have touched you. I should never have raised my voice at you." "Nothing excuses that." Naomi met her eyes. There was no anger in her gaze, only measured disappointment shaped by lived experience. "You hurt me because you thought I didn't belong here," she said softly. "Not because of a device, not because of a setup, because you let prejudice choose for you." Tessa's breath faltered. Her lips trembled. "I don't know why I am like this," she whispered. "I don't know how I let fear turn into cruelty." Naomi held her gaze for a long, weighty second. "Because fear is comfortable," she said. "Power is comfortable, and judgment gives people a sense of control they haven't earned." Tessa's eyes filled again. But the tears didn't fall. After a long silence, Naomi shifted her attention to Captain Harlow. "We don't know who else is involved," she said, "or how far this plot goes. But once we land, we will not react loudly or impulsively. We will move with precision." Harlow nodded firmly. "I'll contact ground authorities as soon as we reach LAX. They will handle security and detainment." She looked out the window. The sky seemed endless, a quiet reminder of the world she had climbed through, the world she still had to fight within. Naomi whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "I have survived worse storms than this." She placed the recorder carefully into her bag and secured the zipper. The battle she had never asked for was waiting on the ground. But so was the truth. And she had never walked away from truth. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the jet continued its steady arc across the sky. The calm glow washed over Naomi's face, softening the bruise on her cheek, but not the weight pressing behind her eyes. She sat quietly, her breath even. Yet the silence around her felt charged. Something unspoken filled the air, thick like static. Captain Harlow remained near the cockpit door, his posture rigid. The truth about his nephew sat on his shoulders like an anchor. Each time he inhaled, his chest rose with regret he wasn't ready to voice. Coleman shifted again. Restless, as if the seat had grown uncomfortable not because of its cushion, but because of what the recorder had revealed. Tessa stayed near the galley, hands clenched together, trying not to crumble under the realization of what she had taken part in. Naomi sensed them all. She felt their guilt, their unease, their confusion, but she didn't move to comfort them. Not now. There would be a time for compassion, but after accountability had been named. She lifted her gaze to Captain Harlow. "Captain," she said softly. He straightened immediately. "Yes, Dr. Carter, we need to begin documenting every detail." Her voice was calm, but a quiet firmness shaped every syllable. "When we land, there must be no ambiguity, no gaps, no room for misinterpretation." Harlow nodded. "Of course, I've already pulled the logs. Cabin communications, internal systems. Everything from the moment the aircraft was prepped." Naomi rested her hands in her lap. "And any footage from the onboard systems?" He hesitated. "We have limited interior camera coverage, but yes, I'll retrieve all of it." Limited. The word pulled at something small inside Naomi, the frustration she had always carried toward industries that resisted transparency. She let out a measured sigh. "Send the information to my security chief once we're cleared with ground control. The investigation will begin the moment wheels touch the runway." Coleman exhaled sharply. "Investigation." His voice tightened. "Is that truly necessary?" Naomi turned her head, meeting his gaze without hostility, but without softness either. "A coordinated attempt to damage my reputation, discredit my company, and use fabricated chaos to support insurance fraud or public smear campaigns." She paused. "Yes, Mr. Coleman? An investigation is necessary." Coleman pressed his lips together. Tiny lines formed at the corners of his mouth lines, shaped by years of dismissing discomfort with privilege. He finally muttered, "You make everything sound so calculated." Naomi didn't blink, because it was silence again, this time thicker, sharper, more sobering. After a long moment, Naomi shifted her attention to Tessa. "Ms. Monroe." Tessa lifted her face a fraction. Her eyes were rimmed red, lashes clumped, posture sagging under shame. "Yes," she whispered. Naomi held her gaze. "Earlier, you said you didn't know why you acted the way you did, why you escalated the situation." Tessa nodded weakly. "I didn't recognize myself," she said softly. "I wasn't raised to be cruel. I wasn't taught to judge people on sight. But," she swallowed hard, "somewhere along the way, I got so afraid of losing control that I forgot what decency looks like." Her voice wavered. "That does not excuse anything. Oh, I know that." Naomi studied her carefully, not for cruelty, not for triumph, for truth. People don't lose their humanity overnight, Naomi said quietly. They lose it in pieces, in small choices, when unchecked assumptions, in the moments they decide to prioritize comfort over conscience. Tessa's breath trembled. Her shoulders caved. I thought I was doing my job, she whispered. I thought making passengers follow rules was the most important thing. Naomi's voice softened, like the gentling of a blade. You weren't enforcing rules. You were enforcing your fears. Tessa closed her eyes, the truth landing hard. After a quiet pause, Naomi continued, I don't hate you. I'm not interested in destroying you. But accountability is not cruelty? Tessa looked up, startled by the compassion threaded through the firmness. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her tone even. Before we land, you will write a statement. Every detail, every instruction you received from Jason Harlow, every moment you chose to escalate instead of de-escalate, everything you overheard, everything you saw. Tessa nodded quickly, relief and fear mixing in her expression. I will, I promise. I'll tell the truth. The promise sounded fragile, but earnest. Naomi turned her attention back to the captain. What we do next matters. Her voice deepened with purpose. If we handle this quietly, we give the people behind this the space to try again. If we handle it recklessly, we weaken our credibility. She paused, inhaling the steady hum of the cabin. We will do this the right way, not for retaliation, but for justice. Harlow's voice thickened with conviction. You have my full support, Dr. Carter. Her gaze softened slightly. He wasn't the villain in this story. He was a man blindsided by someone he trusted. She recognized that pain. She had lived it many times. Thank you, Captain. Coleman cleared his throat. Dr. Carter? His voice cracked faintly. I know I contributed to the situation, and I want to. He stopped, searching for words he wasn't used to forming. I want to do what's right. If you need a statement, I'll provide it. Naomi watched him carefully. His discomfort was genuine and complicated. I will need one, she said softly. And I expect it to be honest. Coleman nodded, shoulders heavy. You'll have it. Naomi didn't offer praise. Not because she lacked empathy, but because accountability didn't need applause. She sat back again, letting the tension release from her shoulders. The recorder in her lap blinked steadily. The captured truth safe now. The cabin seemed to exhale with her, as if the aircraft itself had been holding its breath through the confrontation. While she gazed out the window, something inside her shifted. A quiet decision she hadn't voiced yet. This wasn't just about clearing her name, and this wasn't just about legal consequences. This was about changing something deeper, something that had followed her since childhood, something society had been reluctant to confront. She whispered to herself, barely audible, this ends with me. Not revenge, not bitterness, but transformation. The jet continued forward, slicing through a horizon painted with gentle streaks of light. And inside, Naomi Carter braced herself for what awaited on the ground. The aircraft began a slow descent, the engines humming with a steady determination that felt almost symbolic. Naomi sensed the shift in altitude through the subtle weight that settled into her chest, a reminder that they were nearing the moment where everything she set in motion would become real. The air carried a faint chill, the kind that accompanies transition. She took one long breath, letting it fill her lungs as she gathered the stillness she relied on to lead. Captain Harlow stepped out from the cockpit again, his expression composed yet marked by an underlying tension. He approached Naomi with a quiet gravity, as though each step he took brought him closer not only to her, but to the consequences awaiting him as well. Dr. Carter, he said, we received clearance. Emergency procedures are approved. Law enforcement is already assembled near the designated hangar. Naomi nodded. Thank you. Make sure communications stay locked. No external transmissions until we land. Understood. She looked to Tessa, who sat at the forward passenger seat, her tablet resting on her knees. The young woman had already begun writing the statement Naomi requested. Words spilled across the screen in uneven lines, each sentence carrying the weight of guilt and awakening. Her fingers trembled occasionally, but she kept going, pausing only when emotion threatened to choke her resolve. Naomi approached her quietly. "May I read a portion?" Tessa looked up, startled. "Yes, of course." Naomi gently took the tablet. Her eyes scanned the first paragraphs. They were painfully honest. Tessa wrote about Jason Harlow, the messages he sent, his instructions, the push to make the flight appear chaotic, the subtle remarks that planted fear and superiority into her instincts. She described the moment she first saw Naomi and how she assumed she could treat her however she wished and face no consequences. Naomi closed the document with a calm breath. "This is a strong start," she said. "Keep going. Do not soften the truth, even when it hurts." Tessa nodded, tears pooling again. "I'm trying. Trying is the beginning," Naomi said softly. "Accountability is the finish." She handed the tablet back. Across the aisle, Coleman rubbed his palms together, his gaze fixed on nothing. For someone who spent his life comfortable in power, he now looked like a man confronting the parts of himself he'd avoided for years. He finally spoke, barely above a murmur. "Doc Carter, do you truly believe I contributed to this?" Naomi settled into the seat across from him. "I believe actions stem from beliefs," she answered quietly. "Beliefs shape instinct, and instinct shapes behavior in moments of pressure." She looked him directly in the eye. "So yes, you contributed?" Coleman flinched slightly. He wasn't used to truth without cushioning. But Naomi continued, her voice a steady river. "That does not make you beyond redemption. It makes you responsible for reflection." He dropped his gaze, unable to meet hers for a moment. Something inside him cracked. Years of status and inherited bias were crumbling in the face of a woman who held her dignity with effortless strength. The plane tilted gently as Captain Harlow adjusted the approach. Naomi felt each shift. Her heartbeat stayed steady, but she sensed a stirring inside her. A memory surfaced, uninvited yet vivid. Her father's voice. "You must never let the world decide your worth." "Naomi, if they push you aside, step forward. If they speak over you, speak clearer. If they question your place, show them the foundation you built with your own hands." She closed her eyes briefly. He had died before seeing her company rise, before seeing her name printed across terminals and executive boards. But his lessons shaped every breath she took. She opened her eyes when she felt Coleman's attention on her again. "Doc Carter," he whispered. "I didn't realize how blind I was. I walked into this flight expecting to be the one appreciated, the one accommodated. I didn't see you." "Not really." Naomi gave him a small, measured nod. "Awareness is the first step. It must be followed by change." He swallowed hard. "I intend to make it right." She didn't offer comfort. Not yet. Growth required discomfort. The plane dipped lower. Lights from the runway appeared in the distance, scattering across the dark landscape like a quiet constellation. The engines hummed with a deeper tone as the descent became more pronounced. Tessa wiped her cheeks and retrieved a tissue. "Is it normal for landing procedures to feel like this?" Harlow answered gently from the galley area. "Emergency approach protocols can feel heavier. The jet is safe." "You're safe?" "Safe." It was a word Naomi never used lightly. Not after what had unfolded. Not after the years she spent navigating spaces where safety was conditional. Depending on who judged her presence as acceptable, her mind returned to the events of the day. The slap, the accusation, the humiliation dressed as authority, the reveal of the recorder, the unraveling of Jason Harlow's scheme. She didn't feel triumph. She felt resolve. The aircraft aligned with the runway. Naomi pressed her palm lightly on the armrest, grounding herself. A vibration ran through the cabin as the landing gear extended. Harlow's voice echoed gently from the cockpit. Prepare for touchdown. The wheels struck the runway with a firm jolt. A rumble followed as the jet slowed, the cabin gently rocking with controlled force. Naomi released a steady breath, absorbing the moment in full. The landing felt symbolic, an end to the airborne chaos and the beginning of something larger, a confrontation waiting on the ground. The jet rolled toward a secluded hangar. Through the window, Naomi saw the faint silhouettes of law enforcement vehicles, emergency personnel, and the discreet lineup of federal agents waiting near the entry point. Coleman whispered, "This looks intense." Naomi didn't turn her head. Truth often looks intense when people aren't used to facing it. The plane gradually slowed to a stop. The engines powered down with a long exhale, creating a sudden quiet that filled the cabin like a held breath released. Harlow emerged fully from the cockpit. "We're here." His voice carried respect and apology and readiness. Naomi rose from her seat with a dignity untouched by the bruise on her cheek. She straightened her blazer, adjusted the strap of her bag, then looked at Tessa and Coleman. "When we step outside," she said, "we walk in truth. Not fear, not excuses, not denial." They both nodded, absorbing the weight of her leadership. She approached the cabin door. Harlow opened it with a firm motion. Cold air swept inside, crisp and clarifying. Naomi Carter stepped onto the metal stairs, her posture steady, her gaze unwavering as federal agents approached. She was not just landing, she was arriving, claiming her space, defining the narrative before anyone else had the chance. The cold air settled around Naomi as her shoes touched the concrete. A hush seemed to fall over the line of agents waiting beside the hangar. Their expressions held a quiet respect, though none of them moved until the lead agent stepped forward with a measured calm. "Dr. Carter." His tone carried both formality and something gentler, as if he understood more than he said. "We're here to escort you and secure the aircraft." Naomi gave a small nod. "Thank you. Please prioritize the safety of the crew. They are witnesses, not adversaries." "We're aware." His eyes softened for a brief second. "We also have questions prepared for you later, but only when you're ready." She appreciated the courtesy. Power rarely showed such restraint. Yet it obeyed her presence here, and it wasn't arrogance that commanded it. It was certainty. A certainty born from lived truth. Behind her, Tessa emerged from the cabin, her steps unsteady. Coleman followed, his shoulders slightly hunched, while Captain Harlow remained at the top of the stairs, making sure everyone descended safely before joining them. Naomi took in the scene. Unmarked vehicles, lights casting long shadows. Two federal officers speaking quietly with airport security, a team of analysts carrying sealed equipment cases toward the aircraft. A part of her longed for quiet, for one sanctuary untouched by chaos, but she pushed that longing aside. There was work to do. One of the agents directed them toward a private briefing room inside the hangar. The walk there felt like crossing a threshold between the world she had known and a truth she could no longer avoid. Naomi sensed the change in the air, a shift from urgency to purpose. Inside, the room was warm, softly lit, with a polished table at the center. The contrast to the cold concrete outside felt intentional, to soften those who had just come through the strain of airborne tension. Naomi chose a seat at the far end. She didn't sit with control, she sat with clarity. Tessa and Coleman took their places nearby. Captain Harlow entered last, closing the door gently before taking a silent seat along the wall, as if unsure whether he still belonged near the center of responsibility. Moments later, the lead agent placed a small recorder on the table. "Before we begin," he said, "let me acknowledge something. What happened on that plane was unacceptable, and you handled it with composure that frankly spared lives." Naomi breathed in quietly. It was not praise she sought. It was truth being acknowledged. "I didn't act for recognition," she said. "I acted because allowing lies to grow invites greater harm." He nodded. "That's exactly why we're here. To make sure the harm doesn't spread further? Naomi leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed yet present. She allowed the agent to begin his questions, but before he spoke, Tessa suddenly sat forward. I need to say something. Her voice shook, but she didn't hesitate. I don't want Dr. Carter to explain everything. I was there. I was the one who, her breath trembled, who acted without integrity. Naomi glanced at her, steady and attentive. She did not interrupt. Tessa continued. I followed instructions I now wish I'd questioned. I treated a passenger like she was beneath me. I judged her the moment I saw her. I let fear and pride guide me. Tears gathered in her eyes. I want my statement documented. Fully, no omissions. The room fell still. The agent nodded slowly. We'll take it in full. Ms. Monroe. Tessa folded her hands together, more composed now. Coleman shifted in his chair. He inhaled, then looked directly at Naomi. Dr. Carter, I spoke to you earlier about wanting to make things right. This is part of it. He turned to the agents. I wanted on record that I misinterpreted her actions. I assumed the worst of her without evidence. I contributed to the escalation through my silence and my judgment. He looked toward the table, ashamed, yet strangely relieved. Captain Harlow watched the exchange with a tightening jaw. Naomi noticed the way his hand gripped the edge of the seat. The conflict within him was unmistakable. When he finally spoke, each word carried a weight he seemed to carry from deep within. My nephew. His voice roughened. Jason has caused more damage than any of us realized. I thought I could mentor him through his arrogance. I thought giving him opportunity would guide him. He lowered his gaze. Instead, I enabled him. Pain etched the lines around his eyes. Not self-pity. Regret. Naomi responded gently, yet honestly. Yet, Captain, accountability is not about taking on the sins of others, but it is about acknowledging where we failed to intervene. He nodded with a slow exhale. The agent leaned forward. Dr. Carter, we're going to need your version of events as well. But I want to allow you to start with whatever moment feels most relevant. Naomi's expression softened into thought. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories settle. Not the slap, not the humiliation, not even the confrontation. She began with the moment she stepped onto the aircraft. I boarded that flight with quiet intentions. Her voice rose gently from the silence. I wasn't there as a CEO. I wasn't there to inspect anyone. I wasn't there to be catered to. She opened her eyes, her gaze calm and direct. I simply wanted to travel privately and quietly after weeks of difficult decisions. She described the small details. The way the cabin smelled faintly of cedar polish, the gentle hum beneath her feet, Tessa's guarded glance, Coleman's posture of entitlement, Captain Harlow's professionalism, Jason's absence, yet presence through the manipulation he set in motion. She explained the escalation without dramatics, the slap without sensationalism, the humiliation without bitterness. As she spoke, the room grew still in a different way, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. Her truth didn't rise like a shout. It flowed like a river that had carved stone for years. When she finished, the agent pressed stop on the recorder. This is more than evidence, he said softly. It is clarity. Naomi sat quietly for a long moment, letting the weight of it settle. The agent continued. We retrieved the internal files from the aircraft. Jason Harlow's digital footprint is all over the tampering, and it matches with communications we intercepted earlier from a private network. Naomi's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't flinch, but inside her, something shifted. This is confirmation, she thought, not closure. Confirmation, the agent added. We'll move forward with immediate charges, and we'll need your cooperation as we follow the chain. Naomi stood slowly, her voice steady. You will have it. As she prepared to leave the room, she paused at the doorway. This is not only about me, she said quietly. It is about every person who has ever been dismissed or diminished because someone else assumed they had the right to define them. The truth echoed across the room, landing deep. Naomi stepped out of the room with a calm resolve, the kind that forms not from vengeance but from purpose. She was not done. She was only beginning. Naomi stepped out of the briefing room into the vast hush of the hangar. The lights overhead glowed with a muted warmth, casting long reflections on the polished floor. Her heels echoed quietly with each step, creating a soft, steady rhythm that trailed behind her. The air felt cooler here, tinged with something metallic, like the faint scent of truth being threaded into place. A federal analyst approached her with a respectful incline of his head. Dr. Carter, we've begun downloading the internal data logs. There's something you may want to see. Naomi nodded, following him toward a temporary workstation set up near the aircraft's loading ramp. Several monitors displayed code, timestamps, flight diagnostics, and encrypted bandwidth records. Her eyes moved across the screens with a calm focus. The analyst brought up another window. We isolated a series of transmissions that happened just before takeoff. Someone accessed the aircraft's maintenance uplink using a masked credential. The signal bounced through multiple proxies, but we traced the pattern. He paused. It matches activity last month, linked to a sabotage attempt on one of your training simulators. Naomi absorbed the information slowly, letting each detail settle. Intuition stirred within her, an old companion whispering that this chain pulled deeper than Jason Harlow's reckless pride. Show me the origin point, she said. The analyst zoomed in on a location marker, a warehouse in Raleigh, registered to a shell company called Pivot Aero, which we now discovered is owned in part by a holding group tied to someone you know. Her calm didn't waver, but she felt her breath pull tighter. Who? The analyst's voice lowered. Elias Dane? For a moment, the sound around her thinned. Not fear. Recognition. Elias Dane. Her former business partner. The man who once sat beside her as they drafted plans for equitable pilot training programs. The man who tried to buy her out when she refused to compromise hiring standards. The man who, when she wouldn't agree to rebrand the company in a direction that erased the values she built it on, launched his own competing venture with tactics whispered about but never proven. Until now, Naomi's voice remained soft, almost gentle. He always disliked that my success didn't require his approval. The analyst nodded cautiously, unsure if he should respond. Naomi's mind drifted, not into memories of betrayal, but into the calm of understanding. Some people weren't threatened by her power. They were threatened by her integrity, because integrity couldn't be bought, twisted, or manipulated. Another agent approached, carrying a tablet. We also recovered a voice memo. Dr. Carter. It references both Jason and something called Phase 2. Naomi took the device. As the recording played, Jason's voice filled the small space. She's careful. Too careful. We push today. Then the next phase starts when the press spins the narrative. Elias says the chaos will be enough to trigger the board's distrust. She can't lead if the world thinks she's unstable. A second voice entered. Not Jason. Colder, measured, strategic. Elias, stay focused. If I'm going to discredit her, I need documentation. Not gossip, not emotion, evidence. Push her to a reaction, anything that makes her look unfit. The shareholders need fear. Fear makes them predictable. Naomi let the recording end before handing the tablet back. Her voice was quiet. You have everything you need. Not yet. Ma'am, the agent replied. We still need to understand the extent of what they planned. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. Tessa approached her from the side. Her eyes carried a faded redness, but her posture held something sturdier now. Dr. Carter. I didn't know it went this far. You weren't meant to know. Naomi answered softly. People like Elias don't recruit accomplices. They recruit liabilities. Individuals who won't question orders because they fear losing favor. Tessa looked down. That describes me. At least, it did. Naomi studied her a moment. No, it describes who you were, not who you choose to become after this. Tessa held onto those words like a lifeline. Coleman joined them, the lines in his face deeper, etched by reflection, not time. Dr. Carter. The agent told me about the recording. Elias Dane. He's been circling your achievements for years. Yes. He has. Did you know he would go this far? Naomi clasped her hands loosely in front of her. I knew he feared losing the fight he started, but I didn't expect him to act with this level of desperation. Coleman hesitated. So, what will you do next? Naomi lifted her gaze toward the hangar doors, where dawn hinted faintly along the horizon. Her expression was steady, yet lit from within by resolve. I will do what he doesn't expect. I will not hide. I will not lash out blindly. I will not let fear dictate my choices. She spoke each sentence like a vow forged quietly in the center of her chest. I will stand in truth. I will let evidence speak. I will protect my people and my company. And I will not let my name be defined by those who fear the strength I carry. Coleman absorbed her words with a slow nod, humbled. A federal agent approached. Dr. Carter, we've arranged secure transport for you and the crew. There will be a formal interview later today, and the investigative team wants you to review some digital findings once they're organized. Naomi acknowledged him gently. Before we move, she said, I want to speak with my staff. The agent stepped back, giving her space. Naomi turned toward Tessa, Coleman, and Harlow. She felt a warmth she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, but recognition. They had walked through fear, truth, and consequence together. You stood in the truth when it mattered, she said. That is more powerful than the mistakes that brought us here. Tessa's breath caught. Coleman lowered his eyes. Harlow straightened his shoulders, as if reclaiming a piece of his integrity. Naomi wasn't done. This is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of a reckoning, and each of you has a part in restoring what was damaged. Her voice softened. Healing is not a passive act. It is a choice we make again and again. They listened, letting her words seep into the spaces that had been bruised by the day's events. Outside, a distant hum grew louder, signaling the arrival of additional vehicles. Naomi sensed the shift. The moment of quiet resolution was giving way to the next stage. She walked toward the hangar entrance. The world outside awaited her truth. Not as a victim, not as a figurehead, but as a leader who refused to be diminished. As she stepped forward, the soft glow of morning touched her face, warming the faint bruise on her cheek. She didn't lift a hand to hide it. She carried it openly, a mark of what she survived. Not what defined her. Naomi followed the agents toward the secured vehicles waiting outside the hangar. The early light touched the concrete with a soft gold, casting long, gentle shadows ahead of her. Something about that glow felt symbolic, like the world was quietly acknowledging the truth she had carried through the night. Her steps remained steady, not rushed, not hesitant, each movement deliberate, as if she were choosing her footing in a place where everything suddenly looked both familiar and foreign. One of the agents opened the door for her as before stepping inside. Naomi paused and looked back at the aircraft she had flown in on. The sleek body gleamed faintly, still proud despite the chaos it witnessed. For years she had poured her discipline, her vision, her reputation into creating a brand defined by precision and trust. Yet danger had found its way inside that sanctuary, disguised as routine. She'd let that truth settle deep in her chest, not to burden her, but to remind her that even the strongest walls require vigilance. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was quiet. Tessa and Coleman sat together in the back seat of another car. Captain Harlow had been directed toward a separate transport for crew members. The agents moved with a calm professionalism, neither rushing her nor treating her like a fragile witness. They understood her presence carried gravity. As the vehicle pulled away from the hangar, Naomi rested her hands in her lap. Her fingers intertwined gently, the familiar gesture grounding her. The hum of the engine filled the silence, a steady backdrop to the thoughts gathering inside her. The agent in the front seat spoke without turning around. Dr. Carter, we'll be taking you to a secure federal site nearby. You'll have privacy, a legal team if you request it, and access to the investigative files as we process them. Naomi nodded. Thank you. He hesitated a moment, then added in a quieter tone, You've shown remarkable composure through all this. Most people would have reacted with anger or fear, you didn't. She breathed softly, not with pride, but with acceptance. Anger has its place, she said, but it rarely reveals the truth. Fear clouds it. I've lived long enough to know clarity is my strongest defense. The agent didn't reply, but Naomi sensed his respect. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Elias Dane. His voice in the recording had been cold, calculated, confident in the predictability of greed and fear. He had always operated from shadows, using misdirection and charm like weapons. She remembered the early days of their partnership, before ambition revealed its sharper edges. There had been trust, at least from her. Belief that shared vision could bridge differences. Hope that integrity could root itself in any heart if given a worthwhile cause. But the world had its way of revealing what people valued most. Elias valued power that came cheaply. Naomi valued power that came honestly. The road curved gently as they approached the federal site. It was a quiet building set away from main routes, its exterior simple but fortified. When the vehicle stopped, Naomi exhaled slowly, preparing herself for the next stretch of truth. An agent escorted her inside. The hallways were calm, lined with soft lighting and doors marked with coded panels. Naomi was led toward a conference suite at the far end. The room inside was spacious, with warm beige walls and a large table at the center. A wide window overlooked a small courtyard where trees swayed in a gentle breeze. The subtle beauty of that view eased her chest for a moment. Please take a seat. Dr. Carter, the agent said. We'll bring in the investigative leads shortly. When she was alone, the room shifted into a space for reflection. Naomi sat with her back straight, eyes drifting toward the window. The courtyard reminded her of the park she visited as a child, where her father would take her after school. They used to sit on a bench near the pond, watching the ducks glide in unhurried harmony. He would say, Stillness is not weakness. Naomi, stillness is strength choosing not to waste itself. She let the memory wash over her with warmth, softening the edges of the long night. Footsteps approached. 2 federal investigators entered the room, carrying several folders and tablets. They greeted Naomi with quiet respect. Dr. Carter, we've compiled the first set of findings. One of them said, What we uncovered confirms the scope is larger than Jason Harlow's involvement. Naomi tilted her head slightly. How far does it reach? Elias Dane intended a multi-phase smear campaign. He replied, Phase 1 involved the incident on your aircraft. Phase 2 was meant to push fabricated stories into media channels through anonymous sources. Phase 3 involved a planned shareholder petition to challenge your leadership based on public concerns. Naomi absorbed the information without an outward ripple. He wanted to replace me, she said softly. The investigator nodded. The documents and communication logs make that clear. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not to escape, to focus. When she looked at them again, her voice carried both quiet weight and calm determination. Show me everything. They spent the next hour walking her through the timeline. Encrypted messages, financial trails, internal flight tampering logs, statements from maintenance staff unwittingly used as conduits, drafted media pitches that had never gone live, and digital fingerprints all leading back to Elias and his network of shell companies. With each new revelation, Naomi didn't tense, she didn't crumble, she didn't break. She listened, processed, and held each fact with the attention of someone who had carried heavier truths before. When the investigators finished their presentation, Naomi leaned forward slightly. I appreciate your thoroughness, she said, But I want to add something to the record. The two professionals exchanged a brief glance, then nodded. She continued, her voice smooth and measured. This is not only a case of corporate sabotage, it is a case of bias weaponized through strategy. Elias exploited the assumptions people are eager to believe about women like me. He knew the public would question my stability before questioning his integrity. A long, quiet pause filled the room. One of the investigators spoke softly. Dr. Carter, your insight is invaluable, and it will shape how we prosecute this case. She nodded once. When they left her to rest, Naomi stayed seated, her thoughts reaching deeper within. She didn't feel anger toward Elias. The world had always known men like him, men who feared being surpassed by someone they never expected to rise this far. But she did feel something else. Resolve? She looked at her reflection faintly mirrored in the window glass. The bruise on her cheek had darkened, but her gaze remained clear. A knock sounded at the door. A young officer peeked inside. Dr. Carter? He said quietly. There's someone here to see you. Someone who requested a private conversation. Naomi turned toward him, waiting. He stepped aside. Tessa Monroe appeared in the doorway. Her expression was a mixture of apology and courage. Dr. Carter, she said softly. May I come in? Naomi gestured for her to enter. As Tessa stepped into the room, she held her hands tightly together, as if anchoring herself. I know you don't owe me a moment more of your time, she began, her voice trembling faintly. But I needed to thank you. You could have chosen to destroy me. You chose accountability instead. Naomi watched her carefully, letting her speak. Tessa swallowed hard. I want to rebuild myself after this, not because I fear punishment, but because I never want to become that version of myself again. The sincerity in her tone filled the room like a quiet confession. Naomi stood and approached her with slow, steady steps. She rested a gentle hand on Tessa's shoulder. Growth requires taking responsibility, she said. Not for my sake. For your own. Tessa nodded, tears gathering again. And you've begun that journey. The young woman exhaled with shaky relief. Naomi let her hand fall back to her side. There is a long road ahead for both of us, but roads become walkable when taken with intention. Tessa left the room with gratitude softening her expression. Alone again. Naomi inhaled deeply. The sky beyond the window brightened further, bathing the courtyard in light. She felt the coming shift. A turning point. The moment before action becomes consequence. This fight is not done, she thought. But neither am I. Naomi remained in the quiet of the conference room for a long moment after Tessa left. The stillness wrapped around her like a thin blanket. Not warm, not cold, but present. The world outside the window glowed brighter. Leaves shifted gently in the courtyard, catching slivers of sunlight that danced along their edges. The day did not wait for her turmoil to settle. It simply existed, steady and unbothered. She admired that constancy. A knock sounded at the door once more, but this one carried a different rhythm. When the agent opened it, a familiar figure entered with calm, confident steps. Her legal counsel, Miriam Hale, tall, poised, with silver strands woven through her dark hair. Miriam carried an energy of quiet authority that matched Naomi's own. She greeted her with a soft nod. Naomi. I came as soon as I received the preliminary brief. Her voice held neither alarm nor pity, only presence. Naomi exhaled slowly. I'm glad you're here. Miriam set her briefcase on the table, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Naomi with gentle concern. I read the outline of what happened. The sabotage, the planning, the intent behind it. She paused. How are you holding up? The question wasn't casual, and it was deliberate. Asked by someone who understood the emotional cost of leadership. Naomi's gaze drifted to the window again. I'm steady, she said softly, and I'm certain of what must come next. Miriam took a seat across from her. Good. Because this case will be public. Very public. It's not just about criminal charges. It touches industry politics, identity, control, and perception. Her tone remained calm. People will want to frame this as a spectacle. You will need to guide the narrative. A quiet strength settled into Naomi's posture. The truth guides itself, she said. My role is to make sure it is heard. Miriam smiled faintly. Before they could say more, the door opened again. This time, Coleman stepped inside, accompanied by an agent. His posture had changed, less defensive, more contemplative. He approached Naomi with respectful caution. Dr. Carter, I was told I could speak with you briefly before the next set of statements. Naomi gestured for him to sit. He lowered himself into a chair, rubbing his thumb across his palm, grounding his nerves. I spent the last hour thinking about everything you said, about clarity, responsibility. He swallowed, and I realized something that scares me a little. Naomi folded her hands, waiting. I realized that so many of my assumptions today weren't new. They were things I learned quietly, subtly, growing up, in rooms where no one questioned them, in places where people like you weren't seen as leaders, just outliers. He met her gaze. Honesty laid bare. I want to unlearn that. Naomi felt a soft shift inside her. Not forgiveness, but recognition of growth. Change takes intention, she said calmly. And courage. Coleman nodded. I'm committed to both. If you'll allow me, I want to be part of rebuilding after this. Naomi held his gaze, weighing the tone, the sincerity, the groundedness in his words. Rebuilding requires honesty at every step, she said. There will be no shortcuts. He nodded again, slower this time. Understood. The agent motioned for him, and Coleman rose, offering a final respectful inclination of his head before leaving the room. Miriam watched him go, then returned her attention to Naomi. You have a remarkable ability to stay steady even when the ground shifts, she said quietly. Naomi let out a breath that softened her shoulders. I learned early that the world rarely grants grace to women like me, so I learned to grant it to myself. Miriam nodded thoughtfully. Well, you'll need that grace now. Because what comes next isn't just justice, it's transformation. Another soft knock interrupted them. A young agent stepped in with a tablet in hand. Dr. Carter, the lead investigator is ready for your final review. They've compiled evidence for the first round of charges, and... He hesitated, glancing at her with a mixture of awe and respect. The media is already outside. Word got out about a breach involving a private flight connected to your company. Naomi inhaled steadily. Of course it did. Would you prefer we escort you through a private exit? He offered. She shook her head gently. No, I've spent too much of my life being hidden, dismissed, or underestimated. I will walk out the front. The agent nodded, understanding the deeper message behind the simple words. Before leaving the room, Naomi turned to Miriam. This isn't about winning. It's about truth taking its place. Miriam smiled with quiet pride. And it will, because you're leading it. They walked together down the hallway. The air shifted again, charged not with fear this time, but with anticipation. Near the exit, Tessa stood waiting, hands clasped tightly, eyes filled with uncertainty. When she saw Naomi, she stepped forward. Dr. Carter? Naomi paused, giving her full attention. I don't know if I deserve to say this, Tessa whispered. But thank you for not giving up on the idea that people can change. Naomi studied her for a moment. Change is a choice, she said gently. You're choosing it. That is what matters now. Tessa's eyes softened with gratitude, and she stepped aside. Naomi pushed the door open. Outside, the air felt crisp and clear. Media crews stood behind barricades, microphones raised, cameras pointed toward the entrance. Their voices rose in a flurry of questions as soon as she appeared. The agents formed a protective perimeter, But Naomi remained composed, her posture steady, her expression calm. One journalist called out, "Dr. Carter, can you comment on the incident aboard your aircraft?" Naomi met the direction of the voice, speaking with a voice that carried without shouting. "There was an incident," she said evenly. "There was sabotage. There was prejudice. There was a deliberate attempt to manipulate truth and damage the integrity of my work, and there will be accountability." The reporters quieted, sensing the gravity in her tone. Another asked, "Are you seeking revenge?" Naomi's gaze warmed slightly, though her conviction remained firm. "No, I am seeking justice, and justice is not vengeance. Justice is truth with structure." She stepped forward, allowing the agents to guide her toward the waiting vehicle. As she approached it, she looked upward for a moment. The sky above stretched wide, pale and open, untouched by the chaos below. She whispered to herself, "This begins the rebuilding. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for the world she would continue to shape." The door closed beside her with a soft click. Naomi Carter didn't feel relief. She felt readiness. The difference was subtle, but transformative. Naomi Carter's journey is not just a response to injustice, it is also a reminder that in life, sometimes we are judged not by our true values, but by the shell others impose on us. But dignity is not in the eyes of the world. Dignity is in how we stand up in the most contemptuous moments. The story shows that calmness is not weakness. It is a noble form of strength, the strength that helps us see what is important, protect ourselves without losing our self-respect. It also reminds us that prejudice can make people do unreasonable things, hurt others without realizing that they are destroying their own conscience. The most beautiful thing that the story conveys is anyone can make mistakes, but not everyone has the courage to look back. Tessa's awakening, Coleman's repentance, and Naomi's forgiving attitude show a simple yet profound truth people can change, if they know how to face the truth. In the end, the greatest healing does not come from revenge, but from choosing to become a better version of ourselves after our wounds. Thank you for taking the time to accompany this emotional story. If Naomi's journey touches you, helps you remember something in your own life, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so we can send you more meaningful and humane stories. Your support is the motivation for us to continue spreading kindness.